That morning, I called the babysitter to confirm what time I'd pick Noah up. She answered on the second ring, sounding distracted, like she was wiping down a counter or folding laundry. Megan already picked him up last night, she said. She said you knew. I didn't say anything. I just stood there in my kitchen with the phone against my ear, staring at the coffee I hadn't touched. The babysitter filled the silence herself. She told me there was a change of plans. A change of plans. I thanked her, hung up, and kept looking at nothing. The night before, I had told my wife it was over. No speech. No accusations. I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't ask for a confession. I just stood across from her in the dining room and said I was filing for divorce. That was all. After weeks of saying less and noticing more, it came out clean. Calm enough that it almost didn't sound real. Megan looked at me like she was waiting for the rest of it. For anger, maybe, or a threat, or one more round of trying to fix what had already been dead for a long time. But there wasn't anything else to say. I remember the way her hand rested on the back of one of the dining chairs. The way she kept blinking, like she could slow the moment down if she stayed still enough. Outside, somebody was mowing a lawn. I could hear the engine through the glass, steady and far away, like it belonged to a different life. I had expected tears, denial, maybe even relief. What I hadn't expected was this. My son had been taken somewhere overnight, and I hadn't been told. That was the moment the whole thing changed shape for me. Up until then, it had still been a marriage ending. Painful, ugly, final, but contained. Standing in that kitchen, phone still in my hand, I understood it wasn't contained anymore. It had moved past betrayal. Now it involved my son. Before everything broke open, our life looked solid from the outside. We lived in Charlotte in a 2-story house that was a little too expensive when we bought it and somehow still felt worth it at the time. Mortgage, 2 cars, a fenced backyard, a refrigerator covered in Noah's drawings and magnets from places we said we'd visit again when life slowed down. We had routines that looked like stability. School drop-offs, grocery runs on Sundays, dinner at the table more nights than not. A life built out of ordinary things, which is how most people measure whether a marriage is working. I worked longer hours than I should have. That part was true before anything went wrong, and it stayed true after. Operations paid well, but it took what it paid for. Long days, late calls, problems that followed me home in my truck and sat beside me at red lights. Megan stayed home with Noah when he was younger, then picked up some freelance work here and there once he started school. We told each other it was temporary, just until my role settled down, just until the savings looked better, just until the next year, and then maybe we'd take a breath. That was how we handled most things. We pushed the real conversation one season further out and called it planning. At first, there was nothing dramatic about the distance between us. It came in small adjustments that were easy to explain. Megan seemed tired more often, distracted. Sometimes I'd come home and find her already irritated, like I'd walked into the middle of an argument she'd been having in her own head all day. Other times she was warm in a way that felt almost deliberate, as if she had remembered halfway through the afternoon that she was supposed to be affectionate and was trying to make up the difference all at once. She'd kiss me in the kitchen while Noah watched cartoons in the next room. She'd reach for my hand in bed after spending 2 days barely speaking beyond whatever Noah needed. I noticed it. I just didn't name it. When you're tired enough, almost anything can be turned into a reasonable explanation. Stress, isolation, parenting, money, the weight gain I told myself I'd deal with after summer, the hours I kept promising to cut back. Marriage, I figured, had seasons where things went quiet and uneven. Maybe this was one of them. Maybe she felt lonely. Maybe I had been gone too much and she was trying, in her own inconsistent way, to find a path back toward me. That version was easier to live with. So I accepted the changes as if acceptance itself could keep them harmless. I ignored the way she guarded her phone more carefully than she used to. I ignored the new attention she paid to errands that never used to matter. I ignored how often she seemed emotionally absent until the exact moments when being close to me served some purpose I couldn't yet see. Nothing in our house looked broken then. That was the danger of it. The dishes still got done. Noah still laughed in the living room. We still made plans for birthdays, school pictures, summer weekends. And I kept mistaking continuity for truth. It didn't come from one moment. There wasn't a single discovery I could point to and say that was when everything changed. It built slowly, the way pressure builds behind something that hasn't cracked yet. The first thing was a message on the shared tablet. We kept it on the kitchen counter for Noah, games, videos, school apps. I picked it up one night to check his homework portal, and a notification slid across the screen before I could open anything else. No name saved, just a number. The message itself was short, casual, the kind of tone that assumes familiarity without explaining it. I didn't open the thread right away. I just looked at the preview and set the tablet back down like it hadn't mattered. Later that night, after Megan had gone upstairs, I checked it again. There wasn't much there. A few messages, spaced out. Nothing explicit. But they didn't read like new conversation. They read like something already in motion. References to plans that weren't written down. Timing that lined up too neatly with the hours. She said she was out running errands or picking up things we didn't seem to have in the house afterward. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask who it was. I just started paying attention. Receipts came next. Small ones, crumpled in the bottom of her bag or left in the car. Places across town she had no reason to be in. Coffee shops that didn't match the timeline she gave me. Gas stations further out than necessary for anything local. Each one was explainable on its own. Traffic. A change of plans. Forgetting to mention a stop. But they didn't line up cleanly anymore. Then there were the days with Noah. She'd tell me he had an activity, something at school, a play date, a last-minute schedule shift. I didn't question it at first. That was her part of the routine, and I trusted her to manage it. But one afternoon I got off work early and decided to swing by the place she said he'd be. He wasn't there. No one recognized his name. No record of any event that day. I went back to my truck and sat there for a while, hands resting on the wheel, engine off. Not angry. Not even surprised in the way I thought I should be. Just quiet. Because by then, it wasn't about one thing being wrong. It was about how many small things had stopped adding up. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. Patterns don't announce themselves. They repeat until you either see them or choose not to. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It wasn't random. It wasn't stress or miscommunication or a rough season that would pass if I worked a little less or paid a little more attention. It was deliberate, and it had been happening longer than I had allowed myself to admit. I didn't confront her. By the time the pattern was clear, confrontation felt unnecessary. There wasn't anything she could say that would change what I had already seen. Explanations only matter when there's still something left to protect. By then, there wasn't. So I shifted. Quietly. I started organizing things in a way I hadn't before. Not out of panic, not out of anger, just out of recognition. If something was ending, then it needed to be handled properly, cleanly, without gaps I'd regret later. I copied financial records, bank statements, credit cards, anything tied to both of our names. I made sure I understood where everything was going and how it moved month to month. There were no major surprises there, just smaller ones that confirmed what I already suspected. Expenses that didn't fit the life she described to me. I adjusted my own accounts, not in a way that would trigger anything immediate, just enough to separate what needed to be separate. I stopped assuming shared access meant shared intent. At home, I paid closer attention without changing how I acted. That part mattered. If she noticed a shift too early, it would turn everything into a performance. I didn't want a performance. I wanted clarity. So I stayed consistent. Same tone, same routines. Same quiet presence in the evenings. I still asked about her day, still sat at the table for dinner, still listened when she talked, even when what she said didn't match what I knew. But internally, something had already closed. There's a point where you stop trying to fix something, not because you've given up, but because you've finally understood it's already gone. That's where I was. Not reactive, not emotional, just finished. The night I told her, it wasn't planned out in detail. We had just finished dinner. Noah was in the living room, half watching something, half asleep on the couch. The house was quiet in that familiar way it gets after 8, when everything slows down and settles into routine. She was clearing plates. I was standing near the end of the table, and I said it. I'm done, Megan. I'm filing for divorce. No build-up, no list of reasons, no accusations laid out like evidence. Just the truth, stated once. She didn't respond right away. She just stood there with a plate in her hand, looking at me like she was trying to decide if this was real or just another version of stress passing through. I didn't repeat myself, didn't explain, because I wasn't asking for anything. That was the difference. In that moment, Something shifted completely, not in her, but in me. I wasn't part of the negotiation anymore. After I told her, she didn't react the way people expect. No shouting, no immediate denial, no scene. At first, there was just silence. Not the kind that feels heavy or emotional, just a pause, like something in her had stalled and needed time to restart. She set the plate down in the sink more carefully than usual, like precision could keep the moment from moving forward. Then came the explanations. Short at first. Controlled. You're overthinking things. This isn't what you think it is. I've just been stressed. Each sentence sounded like it had been used before, just not in this context. Like they had been waiting for a different conversation and got pulled into this one instead. I didn't respond to any of it. I leaned back slightly against the table and listened the same way I would listen to a report at work, focused, neutral, without interruption. Not because I respected what was being said, but because I didn't need to challenge it. The facts were already separate from her words. That's what changed everything. At some point, she stepped closer and reached for my hand. It was automatic, familiar. The same gesture she had used 100 times before when something between us needed to be softened or redirected. For a second, it almost looked like it might work, like muscle memory could override everything else. I didn't pull away immediately, but I didn't hold her hand either. I just let mine rest there, unmoving, until she felt the difference herself. That was when her expression shifted. Not dramatic, not even fully visible, just a slight tightening around the eyes, like she had reached for something that wasn't there anymore. You don't mean that, she said, quieter now. I didn't answer, because meaning it wasn't the point anymore. It was already decided. The rest of the night moved in fragments. She tried different versions of the same approach. Calm reasoning, soft concern, a kind of restrained urgency that never quite crossed into panic. I watched all of it from a distance that hadn't existed before. Familiar, but no longer mine. That's the only way I can describe it. When she left the house later that night, she said she needed air. Said she was going to drive for a while. I didn't ask where. Didn't check the time when she walked out. Didn't follow. I just sat in the quiet after the door closed, listening to the absence settle into the rooms. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anything to be fixed. I was waiting for it to unfold. When I realized Noah had been taken without my knowledge, it stopped being just about the two of us. Up until that point, I had kept everything contained inside the structure of the marriage. What she was doing, who she was seeing, where she was going. It all fit into a category I could manage quietly. It was personal, controlled, something I could document and address without outside interference. But this was different. I called Megan first. It went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I called again 10 minutes later. Same result. Then I called her sister. She picked up on the third ring, and before I even said anything, I could hear the hesitation in her breathing. Not surprise, not confusion, recognition. Hey, she said carefully. Where's Noah? I asked. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough to confirm what I needed. I thought you knew, she said. Same words. Same tone the babysitter had used, but this time it didn't sound casual. It sounded rehearsed. I didn't, I said. Another pause. She's just with a friend for a couple days, her sister added, too quickly. It's nothing serious. A friend. I didn't correct her. Didn't push. Send me the address, I said. She hesitated again, and I could hear something shifting on her end, like she was weighing how much she was supposed to say versus how much she already had. I don't have the exact. You do, I said, not louder, just steady. That was enough. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed with a text. An address outside Asheville. I stared at it for a moment, letting it settle into something real. A place. Not a guess, not a theory. Something physical I could drive to. And then there was the name. Dylan. I had seen it before. In the messages on the tablet. In small references that didn't stand out until I started connecting them. At the time, it had just been a name without context. Easy to ignore if you weren't looking for it. Now it had context. Now it had a location. I didn't rush. That part mattered. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and the folder I had started keeping in my truck over the past few weeks. Not because I knew I'd need it that morning, but because I had already prepared for things to move in directions I couldn't fully predict. On the drive out, I didn't play music. Didn't call anyone else. I just followed the route, mile by mile, watching the distance count down. This wasn't about confronting her anymore. It wasn't even about understanding what she had done. It was about my son. And whatever this had turned into, it had already crossed a line that didn't belong to her alone. When I got to the house near Asheville, I didn't park right in front of it. I pulled over a few houses down, engine still running, and looked at it through the windshield like I needed to confirm it existed before stepping into it. It was quiet. No movement outside. No cars pulling in or out. Just a normal house on a normal street. The kind of place that doesn't suggest anything out of place unless you already know what you're looking for. I turned the engine off and sat there for a few seconds longer. Not thinking, just steadying. Then I got out and walked up the driveway. I knocked once. Firm, not aggressive. The kind of knock that expects an answer without demanding it. Nothing. I waited. Knocked again, same way. Still nothing. I could hear movement inside then. Subtle. A shift in the floor, maybe a door closing somewhere deeper in the house. Enough to know someone was there. Enough to know they were choosing not to answer. I didn't knock a third time. I stepped back, took out my phone, and called the police. I kept it simple. Gave them the address. Told them my son was inside and had been taken without my knowledge or consent. My voice didn't change while I said it. No urgency, no anger. Just information, clear and direct. They told me to wait. So I waited. A few minutes later, a patrol car pulled up behind me. Then another. The officers stepped out, asked a few questions, and approached the door themselves. This time, the knock carried authority. The door opened. Megan stood there. She looked different, but not in a way I could easily define. Not disheveled. Not panicked. Just exposed. Like whatever version of control she had been holding on to didn't extend to this moment. She started talking immediately. Explaining. Justifying. Words moving too fast to follow. Overlapping each other before any of them could settle. I didn't listen. One of the officers asked her to step aside. And then Noah came into view. He didn't hesitate. He saw me, and he ran straight past everyone else, across the threshold, and into me like that was the only direction that made sense. I dropped down slightly to catch him, my hand steady on his back, feeling the weight of him, the reality of him, right where he was supposed to be. "You're okay," I said quietly. He nodded against my shoulder. Behind him, Megan was still talking, still trying to shape the situation into something it wasn't. The officers were responding now, their tone measured, controlled, asking questions that didn't leave room for interpretation. I stood up with Noah beside me. I didn't look at her. Didn't respond. Whatever conversation was happening behind me, I wasn't part of it anymore. That part was finished. After that, things moved without much input from me. Not because I stepped back, but because the situation had already crossed into a space where structure takes over. Once the police were involved, once there was a record of what happened, it stopped being about interpretation. It became documentation. There were reports filed that day, statements taken, dates and times written down in a way that didn't leave room for revision later. I gave them what they asked for. Clear answers. No extra detail, no emotion layered on top. Just what I knew, what I had seen, and what had already been happening in the weeks leading up to that moment. Megan tried to reframe it. Not directly to me. That part was over. But through the process, through explanations, context, intent. Words like misunderstanding, temporary, overreaction. All of it shaped to soften what had already been established in plain terms. It didn't land. Because by then, it wasn't about how it sounded. It was about what could be shown. I had already done the work before any of this escalated. The messages, the receipts, the inconsistencies tied to specific days and times. Not collected with this exact outcome in mind, but organized enough that they held together when it mattered. That made a difference. Things moved quickly after that. Temporary arrangements first. Where Noah would stay. How decisions would be made in the short term. It wasn't dramatic. No arguments in hallways. No drawn-out exchanges. Just structured conversations, mediated where they needed to be, based on what had already been documented. I didn't push for anything beyond what was necessary. I didn't need to. The situation spoke for itself. At home, the shift was immediate. Noah's room stayed the same, but the house felt different in a way that didn't need to be explained. Quieter, but not empty. More defined. Like the uncertainty that had been sitting in the background for months had finally been removed, even if what replaced it wasn't simple. He asked a few questions. I answered what I could without adding anything that didn't belong to him. Where he would be. What would stay the same. What wouldn't. He accepted it the way kids do when the structure around them is clear enough. Megan reached out a few times during that period. Messages, mostly. Short at first, then longer, trying to reopen something that had already closed. I read them, but I didn't respond beyond what was required for Noah. There wasn't anything else to say. And over time, the process did what it's designed to do. It removed the noise, left only what could be measured, decided, and finalized without interpretation. Now Noah lives with me. The house settled into something simpler once it was just the two of us. Not easier, not lighter, but clear. Mornings started earlier. Breakfast at the same time every day. Backpacks checked twice before we walked out the door. Evenings had a rhythm that didn't depend on anyone else adjusting it. Structure replaced uncertainty. That mattered more than anything I could explain to him. Megan sees him on a schedule now. Set days. Set times. Exchanges handled without conversation when possible. If something needs to be communicated, it goes through the same channel every time, brief, direct, limited to what concerns Noah and nothing else. We don't revisit the past. Not because it's unclear, but because it's already resolved in the only way that matters. There's nothing left to argue about. The first few times I dropped him off, he would look back before going inside. Not hesitant, not afraid, just checking. Making sure I was still there, that the handoff didn't mean something else was changing without him knowing. I stayed in place until the door closed each time. Consistency builds faster when it's visible. Over time, he stopped looking back. That's how I knew he understood the boundaries of it. Where he belonged. What was stable? Megan tried, early on, to extend the interaction beyond what was necessary. A question that didn't need to be asked. A comment that reached slightly outside the structure we had in place. I didn't engage with any of it. Not cold, not reactive, just precise. Everything stayed where it was supposed to stay. At home, things became quieter in a way that didn't feel empty anymore. The tension that used to sit in small spaces, the pauses between conversations, the inconsistencies I couldn't name at the time, was gone. In its place was something steady, predictable. Noah adjusted in his own way. School, friends, routines. He didn't carry questions that didn't belong to him, and I didn't give him any. What he needed was consistency, and that's what I built around him. The rest didn't factor in. Megan and I exist in the same structure now, but not the same space. Parallel, defined, limited to what's required. There's no hostility in it, but there's no overlap either. And that's what keeps it stable. Sometimes I think about the moment I said, "I'm done." Not the words themselves, but the stillness around them. The way the house felt unchanged for a few seconds after, like nothing had actually moved yet. Like it was still possible, in that narrow space, for everything to fall back into place if I chose differently. At the time, I thought that was the end. That everything important had already happened by the time I said it out loud. But it wasn't. It was just the point where I stopped participating in something that had already been unraveling on its own. Looking back, the real shift didn't happen in that sentence. It happened in everything leading up to it. The quiet observations. The decision to stop explaining things away. The moment I chose clarity over comfort, even before I had all the answers. That's what carried everything forward. Now, when I think about it, there's no weight to it. No second guessing. Just a clear line between what was and what is. And the understanding that ending it wasn't the collapse. It was the correction. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.